Marconi invented the wireless radio, right? And he started with his work with telegraph, and then it went to wireless telegraph. Well, in his demo of the wireless telegraph in 1903, what you see on the left is a projector, and that projector is similar to the one he was using to project and talk about his wireless telegraph to the people he was presenting to. Well, one of his rivals was upset with that and actually hacked the projector from the standpoint as he was able to send coded Morse code messages in the projector by flashing the bulb on and off. And it wasn't until later in the presentation that they realized that. Quite a interesting thing to think about, but that's a corporate espionage, right? I mean, we're talking about things where you have two rival organizations trying to get a foothold in a market, and there they are hacking each other. But that was 1903, right? That wasn't 2003, that was 1903. So that's this human behavior has been with us for some time. This is the Zimmerman telegram. It's basically a World War I artifact where they talked about the coded message intercepted by the Germans, and the Germans were trying to get Mexico's government involved in the Civil War. Excuse me, not Civil War, the World War I, to basically keep America out of World War I in Europe. And it was pretty convoluted, but ironically, it was discovered by the British. It was transmitted on American soil, and so the British were actually tapped into the telegraph systems of the United States at that time. Now, let's fast forward to today, right? I mean, that's historically where we're at, but the trends are nothing new. I mean, and nothing that you haven't heard from the media. I'm going to try to help perhaps maybe get some detail that maybe the media doesn't provide you, so that you are more informed about what's going on. These numbers are a little eye-popping sometimes, and so for example, the average healthcare breach cost was $6.45 million, and that's not an insignificant number. And it's not just big hospitals. Small community hospitals have went out of business because of a breach or because of a ransomware attack that they've had. Just another one I would pick out here is that sometimes it takes around 314 days on average. That number varies, but it's almost 2/3 to almost a full year before people actually discover they've been breached. And so that can be, means that attackers are in your network for quite some time. Almost 3/4 of these breaches are financially motivated. When this all started early on, sometimes finances weren't the primary target. A lot of times it was people just testing things out, or we use the term script kiddies sometimes, where kids playing around, right? Like the movie War Games in the 80s. But now it's all pretty much funded and driven by cybercrime. And there's this intricate connection between cybercrime and nation state actors that kind of drives a lot of this. And so we're going to talk more about how you can protect yourself, but also what we need to do at a more collective level to help with this. So let's talk a little bit about ransomware. Ransomware is essentially where a piece of malware or a virus gets on your machine and infects your machine and locks it, and so that your data is locked. And when these things first started coming out about 10 or 15 years ago, many times people would just wipe their computer and move on. But now so much of our lives are part of those machines, like our pictures, our financial documents, maybe things that are keepsakes, emails and communications we wanted to keep from loved ones, that now that becomes a point that we have to, like, let's do something about this, right? So it started out with those individual attacks on individuals. And so it would say for $300 or for $100, you could unlock your computer. Here's where you go to pay. And then you go to pay, and honestly, the criminals would follow through with their promise and unlock the machine, because of course it was bad for business if they didn't. But that has moved into another layer now. And now the ransomware is used to hold whole entire networks and entire organizations hostage, essentially, is what it is. And they use that to extract that money from those businesses. So this threat continues today, obviously, but in a much greater capacity. As people have protected their networks better and done some things, now it's moved into this realm of trying to attack the individuals on that network so that you can get inside and spread around. So 4% average of people who click a link with a phishing email. Anybody ever clicked a phishing email link? I have. Yeah, it's not fun. But there's a reason. And unfortunately, many in the industry have used a very negative connotation for that reason. My reasoning is that we're all so busy and distracted. Typically, people click the link because they're expecting and they have a level of trust with the people that they're working with, right? In the Midwest, that number is actually much higher, and I think that's because we're more trusting of our neighbors and the people we work with day to day. And so if we see an email from someone, we think, oh, well, that must be the person I know, and so it couldn't be someone trying to do something harmful to me, right? This other number is interesting. So since 2016, on average, right, about 4,000 ransomware attacks daily. That's daily. That's every day. Now that doesn't mean they're successful, but that means that people are trying that, right? And unfortunately, most recently, during the pandemic, this has been stepped up around our health providers. And this map talks about basically the number of attacks that were successful against health networks across the country this last year in 2020. California being the most attacked, but as you can see, still everyone suffered something. There was an attack at the Nebraska Medicine in Omaha. I think North Platte Regional Hospital and Kearney Regional both were attacked and were down for several days. And when that happens, they can't schedule surgeries, they can't do stuff that they do to service the people that they're there to serve in those communities. And so, you know, protecting against these things starts with us. And so we have to learn, kind of unfortunately, what's going on out there, which is what we're talking about now. And then we're going to also talk about how you can do things to help protect what you are doing daily. Now, the other thing that's going on that is that we talked about how linked we are and how, you know, that extortion of ransomware is one type of concern and issue, and certainly continues to be. But there's also this stealing of ideas and the intelligence that your organizations, maybe your intellectual property, people write books, that book gets stolen, any of that kind of stuff seems to be marketable. And it does not, it's driving these cyber criminal networks as well. You know, these threats can be things we call, these are a lot of terms that are security specific, but I think the main thing to take away here is that there are nation state actors that are working through this, and that, you know, they are driving some of this. Now they have these units are separated from their actual government organizations, but it's still part of basically their governmental structure and how they're funding those groups. So the two I'll mention, there's myriad of any. If you can imagine, any of our adversaries have these things. And I use the term adversary rather than foreign, or, you know, we don't want to talk about the Chinese. It's not the Chinese people, right? It's the Chinese government that's funding this stuff. And so we have to remember that that's what's going on here. Anyway, this picture here, if you look way in the back here, there is a group, that's where the People's Liberation Army resides. And in this building here is what was identified in 2010, where there's over 30,000 hackers essentially working to infiltrate and get into networks. You know, as you can imagine, that Mandiant was not well received then in China, but that's the way it goes, right? And then we can talk about the Russian election hacking in 2016, or the fact that they tried to hack the 2020 election too, as well, right? All things that are just two examples of literally myriads of attempts, but these are adversarial government kinds of things that are going on, right? Why do we bring this into, how does this matter to you, right? Why do we care in Northwest Iowa why that happens? I'll tell you why. So here's an example. This is from the FBI's website. It was only recently made public, but the article was published in 2016. In Iowa, they stopped a gentleman at the airport who had loads of corn stuffed in his pockets. And so what this is an example is all this intellectual property theft of DuPont and Pioneer and Monsanto had all these proprietary corn seeds and that he had stolen and was taking back to the Chinese corn seed company that he worked for in China, right? This is just one of literally hundreds of examples of these kinds of attempts. Now with the internet and with, you can't necessarily do a genetic sequence through the internet right now, right? And so they couldn't steal that intellectual property as easily as just grabbing the corn and taking it back with them. But there's many other things. For example, I don't claim to know much about this, but when you're animal husbandry, when you're breeding animals, that people spend many years, if not decades, getting to a particular livestock situation that is a good quality cow, for example, or steer, right? A good quality sheep that's producing the right amount of wool. That has value, and these actors are after that for whatever reason, and they don't want to pay for it. They'd rather spend the time and effort to take that, right? So again, though, maybe you don't deal in that sort of thing. Well, this is even a little more closer to home, but just sort of. It is in the United Kingdom, but it is that the farmers there are looking for the government to provide them security advice. They want to hear for how the government is going to protect them and help them protect their systems because their farms have become so digitally enabled. The UK is a little smaller thing, and so the farms tend to be a little smaller, and so they can do things like automated robotic combines and things of that nature that are working on their farms. And they're worried about the risks of cyber attack because if somebody were to interfere with that, that would destroy their crops potentially, or the ability for their crops to get to market on time. All sorts of issues in that whole supply chain that can be exploited by bad guys. And this is just talking about, again, in 2019 in the summer, 22 small towns in Texas, their libraries, their schools, et cetera, were hit with ransomware attacks. And that was just, again, that's trying to extract money out of folks. I mentioned it before, and I'll say it again, most of this is related to cybercrime activity. Not everything around a breach is cybercrime, but what we've been talking about and the biggest risk are things around cybercrime. And this is just a picture from the FBI that I think only probably matters from the standpoint of understanding that most of these layers don't know each other. The people stealing the data don't know the people doing the phishing campaign that don't know the people who are profiting from it. The thing that struck me when I first saw this several years ago is that they're organized. They're extremely organized. And so what that means to me is that we need to be organized too, right? They're exploiting our lack of organization and maybe the lack of cohesiveness that we have between each other as people to extract money out of us, right? And so it's created a huge market for them, but we've got to stop that so that there is no market for them. So a data breach is obviously a risk, right? And so it's like, well, what if my data gets lost or stolen? That's a problem. What you don't want it to do is somebody to turn around and steal your money, steal your investments, steal your retirement, steal your intellectual property. But breaches are mostly caused by criminal activity. If you look at the criminal attack and the malicious insider, which means somebody from the inside that decides they want to profit off of that information, that's over 56% of what breaches are dealing with. Some of them are just lost devices. Those are, unfortunate, but typically there's no harm after it's done. Some of them are employee mistakes, third-party snafus. Some are intentional, non-malicious employee action, those kinds of things. But essentially, they're discovered by either somebody doing an audit or an employee detected it, or in this case for healthcare, right, a patient complaint. Somebody's trying to file their Medicare and they realize they can't because somebody already has filed it for them. Those kinds of things. Let's talk about, if you recall, a couple of years ago, there was a breach with Equifax, and I've got two here. This is really the most relative one, I think, to our conversation today. Equifax was tasked with holding on to information for almost more than half of the United States, right? And they essentially lost to attackers 147.9, almost 150 million consumers who were affected by this. And that's just with these issues here, right? Name, birth date, social security number. That's damaging. That's extremely damaging. And then what happens is not only do we have the lost time and productivity to have to make sure that we're protected, there are people that get exploited then as a result of this. And that's very, very unfortunate, right? This data that was compromised, primarily social security numbers, driver's license numbers, all things that you need to get loans, et cetera, right? The date that it was disclosed was in September of 17. It was discovered in July, the previous July, and then the breach actually had occurred in May prior to that. So that is almost, 3.5, 4 months. We all had heard about Target many years ago in 2014. I think the main thing here, as opposed to the actual details of what happened, is that this had direct implications for the people that work there and for the shareholders of that organization. The cost to the banks and credit unions to reissue cards, $200 million. Upgrade all their terminals. Terminals were $100 million. They had a 46% drop in profit in the fourth quarter of 2013. And then they laid off 13% of its workforce in 2015. That all is impactful to the economy, to everyone, to the individuals involved in that. And that was, their stock price dropped, and it was impactful to certain individuals, as it should have been, right? I mean, that's what happens. Unfortunately, the other people that suffer from that are its workforce, right? Well, so all this, up to this point, we've been talking about stuff that makes you very tense and anxious, right? So I apologize for that. But the intent here is just to understand where you're at and the world that you're living in when you're working with the internet. That doesn't mean we don't do email, we don't work online, we don't do e-commerce. It just means we have to be cautious and careful, right? The average, just a couple things out of this slide here, the average cost of a ransomware payment. So when ransomware is hitting these hospitals now, when they make a payment, the average number there is $111,000. So that means a hospital, somebody's coming up with $111,000, and then there's $84,000 in the cost to recover. So these are not, small things. Many small dentist office and radiology firms and so forth have ended up, basically out of business when they were done. I'm going to pause for just a second and see, Nicole, is there anybody that had any questions or?
No questions yet. Anyone is welcome to unmute themselves or to put something in the chat box if you'd like to ask a question, but nothing yet, Matt.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's talk about what we can do here and what are the things that actually happen. One of the things we talked a little bit about phishing, but we haven't talked about the details of that. The primary vector or the primary way that the phishers and what they're trying to do is they're doing things what the FBI calls a business email compromise. For example, what happens is the CEO someone pretends to be the CEO and sends an email that says they need an immediate wire transfer. And they need it to this particular thing, they need it by close of business, and here are the instructions. And so if the organization has not organized itself well enough if it's small, usually is what happens. Somebody just gets right on that and completes it. And then that money is gone as soon as it's wired, because there's usually no takebacks, right? Because the attackers, they have a pretty good idea of how that is coming in. As soon as that money shows up, they move it to another account and then they close that account. There was an organization in Omaha, and this was made public, and it was made public accidentally. Schooler Company, which is a grain trading company and grain holding company. The controller there got an email from their CEO, who had been traveling in China in the East, making deals for the grain that they were holding. And what ended up happening is that he or she got an email that said, hey, I need you to wire to these two accounts in these amounts today, just like we're looking at right here, right? And so he or she did. And then realized the next day, I maybe shouldn't have done that, and reported it. And sure enough, it had been a business email compromise to the tune of $17 million. And so that money was just gone because those accounts had already been closed and moved on. Now, of course, investigators continue to investigate to the best of their abilities there, but that's an example of somebody here in the Midwest being impacted by that. And I don't know if their insurance covered it or not, but nonetheless, it was certainly an unfortunate event. I'm sure it caused people a lot of stress and very problematic. That business email compromise, though, is a type of phishing. It always starts with these emails that are trying to basically convince you that they are who they are saying they are. And that's where scams begin. Perhaps they're trying to sell you repair or PC services or things of that ilk. The other one that is relevant, I think, is I know of at least a few people personally that have suffered investment redirections. And what I mean by that is their investment accounts basically were compromised because of these phishing attacks. And then the investments were basically put in different accounts. And when they went to look at their retirement, either half or all of it was gone. That's catastrophic, right? Those kinds of things are just horrible. Now, there's things you can do to not only protect yourself, but also get law enforcement involved to help you get that money back. And they're getting much better at doing that than they used to do. But it's just something you need to be aware of. My intent is not to make you mistrust everyone that sends you an email, but we do need to kind of think about, how we protect ourselves against this, right? So always be wary of emails that are asking for confidential information, especially information of a financial nature, right? And I conduct business via email as well, right? And it's just part of our daily lives. But you have to make sure what you're dealing with there, right? Don't get pressured into providing sensitive information. Anyone who's legitimate won't request that via email, or if they do, call them and ask them and say, "Oh, is this really you? I'm just making sure that this is you." My mother, who's 82, she gets these things from her. I think it's from not Fidelity, Vanguard. And so what she always does is she calls them. That's just the rule we have. If she gets something from Vanguard she has a question about, she calls them first before she does anything. The phishers like to use scare tactics too. They threaten to disable accounts. They maybe say they'll delay, we're going to shut off your access if you don't update your account information. Always things like that. If an organization, most organizations are switching to more what I would say softer approaches to that kind of stuff. They're fortunately not letting the IT people write the emails anymore, which is good. They're letting people who are communications experts so that you know that this is something that you can call to get help with if you need to. Again, I mentioned this, contact people directly to confirm, who it is. With those business email scams, or the key thing there is implementing a process in an organization that basically says, if I get an email requesting money, I'm going to call the person who's requesting that. I mean, if it's the president, then the president gets a phone call from the person writing the check and says, I'm just verifying that you authorized this. And then that way there's some sort of a step check in there that people can say, okay, that's great. That yes, it is you, or no, it isn't. No, I didn't do that. And then you stop their attack. You know, make sure and check their privacy policy. What do they do with your information? You know, sometimes that's the other piece of the other side of the coin is sometimes phishing is not trying to get money out of you. They're trying to get information. And they use that information for marketing or anything, things of that nature. One thing to look out for too with phishing emails is they usually aren't personalized. They're getting better though, so we have to be careful with that. But authentic emails from your bank offer and reference an account you have with them. They might be more general in a phishing email. They might not say it directly. Right? And you know, try not to ever submit information via forms embedded with an email message. There's ways that you can shut that off so it doesn't turn it on automatically. And you know, if it's just images you're worried about, maybe if you trust them, turn on images. But if not, don't turn them on. Those things are typically being shut off by default now. But if not, I'm sure there's people that can help. I know that the Chamber of Commerce usually has a good list of folks that are helping with that, as well as many businesses in the cities that you work with, like your bank. You know, don't use links in email. Well, we just send Zoom links in email, right? I mean, that's how this works. But I think it's more, and I'll show you some examples here. It's more about how do you use links in email than it is not having them in there directly, right? And then, you know, have effective software to combat phishing. So there are programs in your antivirus or your internet security suites like Norton's or to a certain degree Microsoft that'll basically block and detect and block fake websites. So those are always important to have. Now here's an example of a phishing email. And just some things to keep in mind is, you know, of course I can't spell typically. I actually can't type. That's what my problem is. But, you know, typically the spelling is poor. Sometimes the grammar is poor. Of course, there's a link in the email, but is the link something that is related to the email? So you have to kind of understand that sometimes. And then there's a threat, right? I mean, they're trying to make you not think about it in depth. They're saying your account will be permanently blocked. And so then your mind immediately goes to, oh, I don't want that to happen. I better go fill this application out now, right? And then of course they want to associate themselves with somebody that you know, someone in your network, perhaps Facebook or your bank or somebody like that. Usually the banks have been doing a good job of patrolling people who are trying to do that. You know, and another example of this is, here's an example of PayPal. So somebody's crafted this to look like it's from PayPal, but if you look up here in the URL, that's what this is called here after the @ symbol, this URL is not a PayPal URL. Now some people say, well, I wouldn't know that anyway. Well, that's very true, but there's other tells here too, right? Perhaps, you know, this is not, this looks a little fishy, so to speak here. And then what's really fishy is that there's no shipping address, meaning they don't know the address. And these things are blank. And so what that is they've made it look like an email from PayPal, when in fact it's not. So this is a good way to actually, and they're trying to get you to click, right? Click this link here, and that's what they're saying. Well, this is confusing, I should click this. Or you can call them or find something on PayPal's site and say, hey, I got this email, is this you? Now I want to talk about something that is not easy to talk about, and that is that because it's so embarrassing to the people that it happens to. But this has been the result of some very problematic issues that have occurred, starting out with what are known as romance predators. This individual is not a romance predator. None of these three pictures here are. These are pictures that were stolen and used in romance predator or romance scam tactics. What they would do is they would take the these pictures. Oh, here's a picture of me getting decorated, for, my job as a fireman, or when I was in Iraq as a veteran. And yet they aren't anything of the sort, right? And so it kind of goes through this process of targeting and recruitment. Then there's seduction. They typically are focused on people who are in isolation, which unfortunately during the pandemic has probably amplified some of that. They don't go after it right away. They just kind of groom people for a little bit uh, until they feel like they're in control of the situation, and maybe are on an informal basis, at least in email or chat. Then they start the financial requests, right? Um, some people I know, for example, this was going on, and he was being asked to bring a woman from the Philippines who was going to be his wife. And he was convinced that this was going to happen until we talked him out of it, that it was not real. He was going to be wiring them $4,000 to bring her to the United States, when in fact, nothing was going to happen except he was going to be out $4,000. And then they repeat it, right, until sometimes the victim's broke or in debt. And there's coercions and threats. Sometimes there's extortion involved. The whole trick here is that people are so embarrassed that they fall for this, they don't want to talk about it. And so this is where we have to be very sensitive and understanding and help each other to help people understand that it's okay. Everybody makes mistakes, but let's stop it now, right? And let's find who these people are so that we can actually stop them from doing things in the future. One thing I will mention, I'll tell you about one breach that I can talk about relative to this, and that was at the University of Virginia. And the University of Virginia has a system that basically monitors and has all the passwords and usernames for everybody on campus, which was about 50,000 with their students and employees, okay, roughly 50,000 people. And with those passwords, they can then, get into their email, they can get into their accounts, all that kind of stuff, right? So one of the systems administrators in the IT department at the University of Virginia, she was a woman about 58 years old, single. Her husband had passed away maybe 6-7 years earlier. She had been the victim of a romance scam, and to the point that she had not only given money, but she had given her credentials for this individual to help her at work so she could spend more time online with him. I know it sounds crazy, but I mean, without judging, she was just vulnerable, right? And that vulnerability got turned into a huge breach where they were able to basically get into all of the University of Virginia's systems and do a lot of damage, both damage to the reputation, but also to their donors and to the people that they were working with. So that's just one example of multiple other personal examples of just single examples of people that fall for this. And so I always put this in my slides because I want people to understand that this has not gone away. Romance scams are still a thing, and we still need to even if it doesn't affect us directly, we need to make sure it doesn't affect our parents, our aunts, our uncles, our friends, our neighbors, anybody like that, right? We need to be able to work with them. I had a friend of mine who I used to work with. He got a text like before I first gave this presentation a few years ago from his neighbor who was 93 years old, and he was being targeted in this way. And the person, Bob, went over and he helped him out and took care of it. Well, if he hadn't done that, what would have happened, right? And so the whole point here is we just need to make sure we have awareness, and part of that awareness is knowing what happens. Now, these people do get caught. They do get extradited to the United States, and they have to, in this case, for example, this person in Nigeria is serving a 27-year federal prison sentence. And, I'm sure that, this is just one example of that, but we do catch them and we do get rid of them. But we've been doing this for a while, right? And so we need to talk about new approaches. And I kind of hinted at it what it is, and that approach is essentially focused in on us working together. The bad guys are working together. I showed you that chart of cybercrime. They're all collaborating. working together to extract money, extract our information, our ideas from us. What are we going to do then, right? And what can you do as an individual? Not maybe even in the greater world, but just what can you do personally, right? So one of the things you can do is keep a clean machine. And what that means, and we'll go over these here in just a second, but basically keeping your machine up to date, right? Make sure you protect your personal information. There are limits to how far you can protect some of that. I mean, with the Equifax breach, obviously there's a lot of people's information that's already out there, but you still can be protective of what you currently have, right? Be web wise, right? Meaning understand the web. You don't have to be integrated in it. I know, my mother only wants to use what she wants to use. She doesn't want to know everything that goes on and how to use every tool and every new social media site, but she wants to know the basics, right? How to be a good online citizen, right? How do we help our neighbors and also work together, but also help our businesses that we work at, our organizations, and be more cautious when we're doing stuff. Now, this is interesting. So Data Privacy Day is coming up here on January 28th. And I imagine there's some areas in your local area where there's going to be opportunities for you to take what maybe papers, maybe disk drives, anything, and you can throw it out, right? And so basically they'll shred it right there for you. And if not, see if you can organize some of that, right? I mean, we all have burn bins, right? If you live out in the country, there's a burn bin will work just as good as a shredder for destroying your data. And so there are things you can do there, right? And then, if you're working and you're protect you and your company against phishing, use that phone to talk to somebody over the phone, or use Zoom as we've been using, right? More frequently now. But also, try to avoid links in your emails. So here's what keeping a clean machine really entails, right? It's automating your software updates. I can't tell you how many times I hear people talking about, oh, geez, I have to update again. It's time to update again. I'll just wait till next week. Well, sometimes that could be problematic, and that allows attackers to get onto your machine, right? So if you can, try to keep it up as much as possible, right? And delete it when you don't need it. When you're done with it, just delete it. You don't need it. Passwords. Everybody loves and hates passwords. Make your password a sentence, right? Make it something unique. Write it down, keep it safe. What I mean by that is don't write it down and put it on your computer, but write it down and put it in an envelope in a drawer maybe, so that you have something in case you do forget it. Because what people do is they're fearful of forgetting the password, so they make it easy so they can remember it, right? And so it's okay to make it complicated and write it down and put it away in a drawer or something like that, right? Think about your apps and what your apps are doing on your mobile devices. Don't just necessarily say, yeah, you can know where I'm at. Why would, for example, a game need to know your location? They don't need to know your location, so don't allow it, right? They're targeting ads at you and they're using your information. And then Wi-Fi hotspots. So as you're traveling, as when we get to be traveling more again, right? Or if you're at the store or whatnot, just be careful about it, connecting to those hotspots. They can be convenient, but at the same time, there can be bad actors and people that are also listening and have compromised those hotspots. Always look for, when you're on the web, instead of HTTP, always look for HTTPS, and that means secure. And that means that everything will be encrypted. In today's world, there's no reason to not have the S. They used to be, it was harder on computers to process that stuff, but there is definitely no reason why not to now. This resource right here, I should have this bigger, but it's stopthinkconnect.org. That is your tax dollars at work that do a great job providing all sorts of resources to help you help yourself, essentially, in terms of keeping yourself secure. Being a good online citizen basically means, if you come across cybercrime, report it. ic3.gov. It's a very simple form to fill out, and they may not contact you back depending upon what it is, but that gives them if there's a particular type or a trend going on, that gives the FBI the opportunity and DHS, Department of Homeland Security, the opportunity to say, oh, we've got this going on, right? Post only about others as you have them post about you, right? That's the golden rule in today's world. Personal information is like money, you know, value your info and protect it. And that means like where you're at, your location, what you have, what your farm looks like, what your job site looks like, any of those kinds of things. So just share with care, right? So again, we talked about many of these things, backing up your data. So a backup is the number one defense against ransomware, because if you go into your local computer shop and I have all my data backed up, can you reinstall my machine? Easy peasy. They just wipe it and they put in a new operating system, and then they copy your data back over to it. So that's an important one. We talked about hotspots and strong passwords. Always have some sort of antivirus turned on, even if it's annoying. One thing about antivirus you should be aware of, let's use Panda. I'm going to use Panda antivirus as an example. Panda is a company that is basically, when they give their antivirus away for free, you're giving them your data. And that's what you're paying for that product with. And so free is really not free. There is information that's traveling back and forth about your use of the tool and what you have on it. So just be aware of that. My recommendation are name brand companies only. Bitdefender, Microsoft, McAfee, Norton, Symantec, those people. We talked about phishing too, right? And how to protect yourself against that. You know, keep this in the eye of your local representatives, both local government and state government and federal government. Talk with your businesses. You know, be an advocate in the community. You don't have to know everything to say, I'm concerned about the activity that's going on. Cybersecurity Awareness Month is in October. There's always ways for businesses on that stopthinkconnect.org to participate in that in a very simple way, and participate in Data Privacy Day, right, on January 28th. So, you know, in conclusion here, we want to talk about that finally, all the pieces of the pie. Collaboration is key, right? Being transparent with each other as much as we can. And when we're collaborative, we amplify the effect of all our resources. If it's just me trying to protect all these things, that's more difficult than if it's like a collection of people, right? Or a group of organizations. So for example, information sharing in the hotel industry, in the hospitality industry is a group. There's an information sharing group about that, same as there is with higher education and financial services. That amplifies the effects of their resources. And then they can develop and share those methods, right? Remember, our secrecy can be used against us, so that when we talk about, well, we can't share that because it's secret, that also can be used in reverse. And so we have to be careful on that, right? And that we have to develop trust across all sectors. We can't think that, oh, the bank has to worry about cybersecurity, but I don't have to worry about it on my farm, or I don't have to worry about it at this dairy farm. That's not necessarily true. Those cybersecurity is now affecting everybody across all verticals, no matter what. And, you know, and of course, protect yourself. If you just start with you, that's a great thing, right? That's the best piece of the pie to close everything off, is because if you're careful at work and careful at home, that eliminates 75% of the threat. So thank you for listening. Hopefully it's been helpful for you. And if there's any questions, and I'm happy to stay on as long as we need to answer them. So.
As we give folks a few minutes, do we have anyone who'd like to ask a question? You're welcome to share that in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask as well. And while people are thinking, I have one question for you, Matt. Can you talk a little bit about like Alexas and the voice automated?
Oh, great question.
How they're connected to our privacy and our information?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nicole. So those are what they call that is the term you'll hear is Internet of Things, right? And what that means is essentially all these things in our homes that automate our homes or make things easier for us, like Alexa or like Google or Siri. And I have to be careful, make sure I don't have one in my room because I'll turn it on by accident. But if you say, "Hey Alexa," right, and then it responds, and that's because it's listening all the time. Now, those groups have said, Amazon and Google have said, "Oh no, we don't keep any of that information. That's just for when, um, you ask the question." Well, there was a court case here recently where the information was provided, and they are actually recording some of that information to target marketing and advertising materials towards you. They claim it's for customer experience, and maybe so, but that could be used against you too. So you can shut those things off though. Amazon has made that and built those privacy features in their Alexa, as has Google and their devices too as well. So basically what you can do is you can limit it so that it's like, oh, okay, it's only going to be on when I'm at home, for example. Or it's only going to be respond to these words, and it's not going to listen all the time. It's just going to listen when it hears a sound, those kinds of things. And so that there are ways to help reduce that, but those do invade your privacy and have been both a help, right? Things like the Ring doorbells, being able to see people stealing stuff from porches and things going on in the neighborhood, but also become a privacy violation if you're not careful. Any other questions? Don't be shy. I know there are questions.
So I don't think we're getting any other questions. Does anybody want to say anything out loud instead of in the chat room?
And there is a new message. How are banks able to pay back through fraud protection, from Tanya Meyer?
Okay, good question, Tanya. So that is part of their insurance, their business insurance is what's going on there, right? And so they have allocated some money, however they've done it, maybe they're self-funding it or they're using an insurance policy that they've purchased. And so then the bank is able to basically refund you that money if it gets stolen, up to certain amounts though, right? I think it's only up to, it depends on the bank and what their policy is, but they have learned that they want you to still bank with them and they don't want that to impact them negatively if they have an issue. And that's something they've had for years, even before hacking was a thing. It was kind of hacking, but they would guess numbers of credit cards and things of that nature. People would do that. And so, yeah, good question though. Hopefully that answers it.
It seems like a lot of like phishing messages or ransomware or things like that are delivered at 5 o'clock on Friday.
Yeah.
So when all your banks and your resources are closed, if that would happen, who would the first person be that you'd recommend for folks to call?
If they like fell victim to a phishing attack or something of that nature. That's a great one. I would say look for resources in your community that people people you can leverage. Perhaps a family member, perhaps, because you're right. When things are closed, that's a difficult situation because then you have to wait till the next morning. Generally, if that occurs, what you can do is run your antivirus to see if something's happened. So just clicking on the link doesn't necessarily mean you've been infected. It just means you have a risk now of that infection, right? Now, if you're talking about like I've sent money to somebody or something of that nature, that's a little more complicated. And so most banks have an 800 number that you can respond to, that you could call. Credit cards all have fraud helplines, that kind of stuff. And so you should be able to maybe have those handy and review those occasionally to just say, okay, here's the fraud number. I'm going to call right now. And even if you have to get a new card as a result of it, if it saves the transaction that you sent, maybe it was several $100s, right? That's worth it in my mind. So.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much, Matt Martin, for being with us today and sharing your expertise. And I think it's just important for me. I go through a busy day and I'm not always mindful of all the things that I need to do to protect my information and protect the organization I work for. And so I really appreciate the pause in the day to really think about those things in a critical way and maybe make some changes to our habits and our behaviors. So thank you so much. Greatly appreciate you sharing your time with us. And for everyone that joined the conversation as well, I know that I took some tips and I'm sure that you did as well. We will definitely share this recording on the extension website. So it's extension.iastate.edu/Buena Vista. And again, I'll share that with Lorette so she can share it out with everyone. Our goal will be to have it posted by next Wednesday.
Well, thank you, Nicole and Lorette, and stay safe out there.
Thank you for everybody that attended today and your time, Matt.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, have a great weekend. For anyone, again, that's new to Zoom, you can go to the right corner of your screen and click leave or end. Thank you. Thanks so much, Matt. Have a great weekend.
You too. Talk to you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Lorette.
Thanks for your time, Nicole. Thanks for running this too.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I'll send you a link as soon as we get it up and ready to go. And then you can share it out.
Sounds good. Thank you. Bye.
Right, have a great weekend. I'm going to just end this for everybody then. So have a good weekend.